I've been a nurse for 3 years. I graduated from UCLA in Los Angeles and decided to complete my community service in a small town called Pine Hollow in rural Oregon, about 220 miles from Portland. The town is known for its beautiful caves and ecotourism, but it's quite isolated, with only 5,000 inhabitants. The town's only health clinic is strategically located on the edge of Highway 101, operating 24 hours a day to serve both the local population and travelers passing through the region. Many of them are adventure sports enthusiasts who come for rafting and cave exploration, activities that frequently result in accidents. One weekend in June 2022, Emily, another recently graduated nurse, and I were on the night shift. It was a particularly cold night with dense fog covering the entire area. By around 2 o'clock in the morning, we had already treated the few patients who had come in and were cleaning the instruments used by the doctor and dentist during the day, chatting about our experiences in nursing school. Suddenly, we heard loud banging on the main door of the clinic. These weren't normal knocks. They were violent, rhythmic poundings that made the security chain rattle loudly. Between the bangs, we clearly heard a woman's voice calling for help. Her voice was broken, as if she was having difficulty breathing. "Help, please, help me. I'm losing too much blood," cried the female voice from the other side of the door. Emily and I looked at each other, alarmed. I quickly put down the instruments I was sterilizing and ran to get the keys from the reception counter, while Emily grabbed gloves and a mask, preparing for what seemed to be a serious emergency. The banging continued, growing more desperate. It took me perhaps 20 seconds to find the right set of keys, and just when I located them, we heard something that froze us in place. A female scream, so high-pitched and full of pain that it cut through the walls as if there were no physical barriers. It wasn't a normal scream. It was the kind of sound you expect to hear only in horror movies. A scream of pure agony, as if the person was being tortured or experiencing the worst possible pain. Despite the shock, I ran to the door with the keys in hand, Emily right behind me. With trembling hands, I finally managed to unlock and open the heavy metal door. Adrenaline was coursing through our veins as we prepared to find a severely injured woman in need of immediate care. What we found, however, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The parking lot in front of the clinic was empty, the highway silent, without any sign of vehicles or people. The dense fog hung over the asphalt, but we still had enough visibility to see that there was no one nearby. The clinic doors were made of thick glass with protective bars, allowing a complete view of the exterior. There was no way someone could have escaped so quickly without us seeing them. "Are you sure you locked the door when we arrived?" I asked Emily, trying to find some rational explanation. "Absolutely. I checked twice, like I always do," she replied, her pale face reflecting the same terror I felt. We stood there for a few minutes, looking in all directions, calling out to see if anyone would respond. Nothing. Nothing but the silence of the early morning, occasionally broken by the distant sound of some nocturnal animal. We went back inside, now checking every room in the health clinic to make sure no one had snuck in while we were distracted. All the windows were closed and locked from the inside. All the rooms were empty. After confirming that we were truly alone, we locked the main door again and sat in the nurse's room, still shaking. We couldn't return to our normal work for the rest of the night. We stayed awake, watching the security cameras and waiting for dawn like two frightened children. The next morning, when the doctor arrived for the next shift, we asked to check the security camera recordings from the previous night. Unfortunately, since a strong storm the week before, the system had been working intermittently. The images from the exact period when we heard the banging and the scream were completely blurred, showing only static. Over the following weeks, we discreetly asked the older local residents if there were any stories about that road or the land where the clinic was built. An 83-year-old man told us that in the 1970s, a pregnant woman had suffered a serious accident on that exact stretch of highway. She was on her way to the hospital in the neighboring town when her car skidded on the wet road and fell down an embankment. According to him, the woman managed to get out of the destroyed vehicle and climb up to the road, where she tried to get help but bled to death before anyone found her. Neither she nor the baby survived. Curiously, the accident occurred even before the construction of the health clinic, exactly at the location where it stands today. The old man also mentioned that other clinic staff had reported similar experiences over the years, especially on foggy nights. I completed my period of community service in Pine Hollow, but I never again stayed alone on the night shift. This was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life and my nursing career. To this day, when I hear loud knocking on doors, my entire body automatically gets goosebumps. If you've experienced inexplicable and dark situations in your workplace, tell us in the comments. Before we continue, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss upcoming videos. Now, let's move on to the next story. I want to tell you a story about my mother, Sarah, who has been a nurse for more than 30 years at Mercy General Hospital in Queens, New York. She has always been a very rational person who only believed in what she could see and touch. At least, that's how she was until 27 years ago, when something changed her worldview forever. Back then, she worked in pediatrics alongside her best friend, Jennifer. The two were inseparable. They graduated from nursing school together and were hired at the same hospital. Jennifer was 32 years old, single, cheerful, and devoted to the children as if they were her own. One night in May of 1998, after finishing her shift, Jennifer was driving home when she became the victim of a terrible accident on the East River Parkway. A truck that had lost control hit her car directly on the driver's side, and she died at the scene. My mother was the first person to be notified, since she was listed as Jennifer's emergency contact on her cell phone. Mum says that when she arrived at the accident site, the paramedics had already covered the body, but she insisted on seeing her friend one last time when she held Jennifer's hand to say goodbye. She felt something she described as an electrical discharge that ran through her entire body. In that moment, she had a strong feeling that this wouldn't be a final farewell. In the weeks that followed, My mother fell into a deep depression. She lost weight, couldn't sleep, and even thought about abandoning her profession. But something kept her going to the hospital every day. The children needed her more than ever, especially now that Jennifer was no longer there. About 3 months after the accident, something strange happened. My mother was caring for an 8-year-old boy named Tyler, who had advanced stage leukemia. During a routine procedure, the boy looked behind her and asked, "Miss, who's that blonde nurse who's always standing behind you?" My mother turned round, but there was nobody there. She thought it was just the boy's imagination, perhaps a side effect of his medication, and didn't give it much importance. However, 2 weeks later, a 6-year-old girl named Emma, who was hospitalized with severe pneumonia, made a drawing for my mother. On the paper were 2 nurses holding hands, one brunette representing my mother and a blonde one beside her. "I drew you and your friend who's always near you," explained Emma. The most impressive incident happened months later, when Ryan, a 10-year-old boy who had been admitted after a household accident, started chatting with my mother during a bandage change. "The nurse who stands beside you told me that you two were best friends," he said casually. Intrigued, my mother asked him to describe this nurse. Ryan described Jennifer exactly: short, thin, blonde, shoulder-length hair, brown eyes, and a wide smile. He even mentioned she wore a necklace with a butterfly pendant, a gift my mother had given to Jennifer on her last birthday. There was no other nurse at the hospital with that appearance. And the strangest thing was that none of these children had ever met Jennifer in life, nor did they have any way of knowing about her. Over time, my mother noticed that these visions happened primarily when she was caring for children in more serious conditions, or who were undergoing painful procedures. It was as if Jennifer was continuing her mission to comfort the little patients during their most difficult moments. When the chief pediatrician at the hospital learned of these occurrences, he told my mother that it was not uncommon for children to see things that adults cannot perceive. According to him, they haven't yet fully developed that filter that prevents us from seeing beyond the material world. Today, 27 years later, my mother still works at the same hospital, though now in a different department. It's been a long time since any child has mentioned the blonde nurse, but she cherishes each of those accounts. For her, it was confirmation that her friend, in some inexplicable way, remained by her side for a time, helping her overcome the pain of loss. When I ask if she truly believes Jennifer was there, my mother always gives the same answer. There are questions that don't need answers, just comfort. Every time I try to fall asleep, I return to that same night, to those endless hallways illuminated by flickering lights and the incessant rumbling of metal carts that seem to move on their own. My name is Robert, and I work as a nurse in a hospital located in Chicago. But it's not just any hospital. It's a place where the line between the tangible and the unknown blurs, and where testimonies of inexplicable events are transmitted almost as if they were legends shared during the graveyard shift. I remember a few years ago, when I was assigned the night shift in the emergency room, I had to be prepared for any emergency. However, I never thought that the most disconcerting urgency I would face would have nothing to do with conventional medicine. I began my routine by reviewing medical records, a repetitive job that involved checking data and signatures, verifying patient names, and making sure all documentation was in order. Time moved slowly, and the prevailing silence was broken only by the distant murmur of cardiac monitors. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, but that night completely changed my perspective. While organizing some files, I heard noises in the main hallway. They were slight sounds, like footsteps dragging without a defined direction. I preferred to ignore them, assuming that perhaps a patient had gotten up to walk, or maybe a co-worker was moving between the gurneys. Then I caught a glimpse of a reflection in the windows, and thought I could make out a shadow moving slowly. I got up cautiously to inspect, but saw no one. I continued with my work, trying to concentrate on my tasks, but the atmosphere was becoming increasingly oppressive. I felt the air was thicker, and every sound echoed in my head. I tried to downplay it. Perhaps the nerves from the responsibility of the night shift were playing tricks on me. However, the situation worsened when, a few minutes later, I noticed one of the gurneys moving slightly. I wanted to attribute it to an uneven floor or to the air current that sometimes ran through the corridor. But the image was too clear to ignore. That gurney, which should have remained motionless, was moving without anyone pushing it. I felt a knot in my throat as I approached to verify if the wheels were properly adjusted. Upon examining it, I found nothing unusual. Still, my uneasiness increased. I returned to my workstation and checked the security camera footage. I thought that if it had captured that movement, I could look for a logical explanation. I reviewed the footage, and my skin crawled when I saw a woman dressed in a white coat standing in the same hallway right behind me. She remained static, and her presence was almost imperceptible, but there she was, without moving. I wanted to think that perhaps it was a doctor on duty, but when I checked the staff roster, there was no record of anyone with those characteristics, not even a visitor who matched that description. I felt bewildered. I tried to find a logical explanation, because I've always believed in the need to base conclusions on verifiable fact. I thought maybe the camera had a malfunction, or that the lighting created an illusory figure. But the clarity of the image left little room for much skepticism. That woman looked as real as any patient, except she was there without apparent reason. I took a breath and decided to leave the surveillance room with my heart racing. I walked down the hallway to make sure no one was in that area. I thought about calling security, but held back, imagining they would take me for paranoid, so I walked the hallway in silence, checked every corner, and found not a single sign of anyone else. Uncertainty invaded me. The hospital felt too large. The corridors seemed to stretch more than normal. The cold, flickering light increased my tension. In an attempt to regain serenity, I returned to my work and continued reviewing files. However, my mind couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious apparition. Every time I blinked, the image of that figure in a white coat returned with intensity, as if something invisible was trying to warn me that this night would not be like the others. I checked the time. It was past midnight, and fatigue was beginning to weigh on my shoulders. Suddenly, I heard another distant crash, as if something metallic had fallen to the floor at the opposite end of the room. I advanced toward the source of the noise with caution, trying to maintain my composure. Although my pulse was quickening, I arrived at a storage area where medical supplies were kept. I found metal trays scattered on the floor, as if they had been pushed, yet there were no signs that anyone had been there. I picked up the trays and put them back in place, trying to convince myself that maybe they had fallen due to a previous oversight. Nevertheless, my intuition told me something was wrong. I forced myself to continue my rounds, checking that each cubicle was in order. The atmosphere was charged with an unsettling feeling, and each corridor seemed quieter than the last. At one point, I looked toward the end of the corridor and thought I distinguished that female silhouette again. She was standing by a door, but when I blinked, she had vanished. My breathing became heavy. I could feel adrenaline coursing through my body. I went to the door to check if anyone was there. I only found an empty room designated for shift changes. I tried to calm my thoughts, reminding myself that it could be my imagination. But the evidence from the security footage and the movement of the gurney reminded me that the facts were recorded. I chose to resume my duties and keep my mind occupied by checking supplies and classifying medical material. I noticed that the night was advancing with unbearable slowness. The accumulated tension made each second feel eternal. As the hours passed, my mind tried to find a rational explanation. I remembered that some colleagues told stories about apparitions on different levels of the hospital. I never believed them. I attributed those narratives to fatigue or suggestion. However, now I was facing something that I couldn't justify with logical arguments. I decided to take a short break in the staff lounge. I took a sip of coffee, hoping the caffeine would clear my thoughts. I checked my phone and noticed the signal was unstable, which was unusual in that area. I wanted to distract myself by checking the news, but the connection failed, so I returned to the hallways. I felt uneasy. Every corner seemed to hide an invisible presence, although I tried to concentrate on the usual tasks of a night shift, like verifying that medications were correct and equipment was in good condition. My attention was constantly diverted to any unexpected noise. My heart was pounding even at the slight creak of a door closing. At one point in the night, I decided to review the emergency medical records. I approached the filing cabinet and noticed that some files were out of place. I began to rearrange them while trying not to think about the strange silhouette that disturbed me so much. I felt the weight of accumulated tension and clung to the hope that morning would soon break. However, the early morning seemed to stretch eternally, and every passing minute increased my nervousness. I checked on the few patients who remained asleep on the emergency gurneys. I made sure their monitoring systems were working well, and that they were receiving the correct treatment. In an attempt to distract my mind, I tried to focus on small details, like properly adjusting the sheets or making sure the intravenous solution bottles had the right amount. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At times, I would turn around suddenly, hoping to catch whoever was hiding. But there was never anyone there. My breathing accelerated just thinking that the figure in the white coat might appear again. In a moment of boldness, I went to the camera room and reviewed the recordings from the last few hours. I watched the tape with great attention, hoping to find some technical failure that would explain what happened. But to my dismay, the female figure appeared in the hallway at seemingly random intervals. She moved from one place to another without me noticing in real time, as if playing with my sanity. My skin bristled upon noticing that sometimes she was positioned very close to me. I even saw her in the corner of the screen, while I passed just a few meters away. That confirmed it wasn't a simple hallucination. Desperation took hold of me when I noticed that every attempt to find an explanation fell short. I took a deep breath and forced myself to continue. I needed to maintain my sanity and fulfill my job. I checked the laboratory to ensure that the samples were properly labeled and stored. I felt the pressure of an increasingly heavy environment, as if the energy of the place was concentrating at a point I couldn't identify. I thought about approaching the security guards, but I was held back by the idea that they would unbelieve me or would think I had lost my mind. Several minutes passed that seemed eternal until I heard a dull thud coming from the treatment room. I advanced with trembling steps. The lights flickered at an annoying frequency, and upon pushing the door, I observed that various medical implements lay on the floor. My heart was racing. I hesitated before bending down to pick them up. The door slammed shut behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one holding it. Confusion overwhelmed me. It was as if the entire atmosphere conspired to make me feel trapped. I took a deep breath and left the room, trying not to lose my calm. However, upon returning to the monitors, I noticed something that left me petrified. In the recording, you could clearly see a white figure crossing the hallway, but her face was diffuse, almost opaque, as if rejecting light. That moment was enough to understand that I had crossed a threshold from which one does not return unscathed. I decided it was time to act. I looked for the supervisor, a man named Thomas, but found him asleep. I felt unable to wake him, as if the atmosphere had plunged him into a lethargy. I returned to the nursing station and checked the cameras live. The screens showed desolate hallways and strange interference. I moved forward with determination, thinking that if that presence wanted to manifest, I should face it. Upon reaching the operating room area, I noticed a heavier atmosphere. Suddenly, the door to room number 3 opened. I entered, expecting to find someone, but the place was empty. A penetrating cold ran through my body as I saw the gurney in the center. The light flickered, and for a second I distinguished the woman in the white coat on the other side. She watched me without moving. I felt a force that propelled me to back away. I ran out and didn't stop until I reached the emergency room. I decided I couldn't stay there. I drafted a brief report and left the hospital as soon as dawn broke. The next day, I submitted my resignation. I understood that my sanity was worth more than any job. And although I can't erase those disturbing images, I know I made the right decision. I never set foot in that place again. Since then, I understand that there are forces that escape our reasoning and remind us how fragile we can be in the face of the unknown. With each passing night, I relive those moments of profound uncertainty. And even though life has continued its course, I keep within me the certainty that that hospital harbors secrets that will never fade.